Romeo x Juliet anime series review. So this anime is written as Romeo x Juliet. I'm not entirely sure how it's meant to be pronounced. Romeo x Juliet, Romeo and Juliet, Romeo times Juliet. I don't know. The written form is Romeo and then an X and then a Juliet. This is a Japanese anime series. I watched this when I was living in Japan. Now, I have not watched a lot of anime. I was never big into anime, but it's a big part of Japanese culture. And so while I was living in Japan and while I was making an effort to watch more Japanese media, both for language practice, I was trying to practice my Japanese, and just for, studying Japanese culture, I said to myself, right, I'm going to go into the video store and I'm going to find an anime series and I'm going to work my way through it. Now, the video rental store I used to go to in Japan, and this was back in 2008. I'm not sure if it's still this way now, but back at that time, the video store was literally half anime. Half of it would be movies and half of it would be various anime series. The anime series would usually be in several discs, so you'd rent, it would take you a while to rent out the whole series. So anyways, I was walking around the anime section, and not being a fan, I really didn't know what to pick out for like the first anime series I was going to work through. And I saw this, Romeo and Juliet, and I thought, I know Romeo and Juliet. I took a Shakespeare class in college, and I did read Romeo and Juliet, and I am an English literature minor, so I am vaguely interested in Shakespeare, and every once in a while I get to talking about Japanese people, to Japanese people about Shakespeare when I was living in Japan. And I picked up, at least in my experience, picked up that Japanese people have kind of a negative view of Shakespeare. In that they view him as something that was kind of, they were beat up about in high school or university classes, and they never really liked, which I guess, to be fair, maybe is the response of many Americans as well. But you did get the sense, I did get the sense that a lot of Japanese people were like, I don't understand why Shakespeare was so popular anyways. So when I saw that there was a whole anime series based on one of Shakespeare's plays, I thought, okay, well this will be interesting, right? See what the Japanese take on Shakespeare is. So I rented it. I knew nothing about this series beforehand. I just saw it on the shelves, picked it up, rented it. This series opens with the Juliet as a little child watching her parents being killed by the House of Montague. And then she escapes out of the castle. It was a castle that was in the sky. So this castle in the sky, and she escapes out of the castle in the sky via a winged horse, a flying horse. So I'm watching Juliet escape from a castle in the sky on a flying horse, and I'm thinking to myself, this actually isn't the original Shakespeare version, is it? It turns out this is a reimagining of Shakespeare's story. The creators apparently felt free to borrow what they liked from Shakespeare's story and then add and remove elements at will. Many of the same characters appear, for example, Tybalt and Mercutio, but often in completely different roles. Sometimes only the name is the same. Shakespeare himself even turns up as a character. Or actually, to the best of my memory, nobody ever refers to him as Shakespeare. They call him Will. But he's obviously meant to be a stand-in for Shakespeare. He's a skinny little playwright who looks just like Shakespeare. It's all a bit jarring at first. I was expecting Romeo and Juliet, and I got this, and I was like, oh, what is this? I don't like this. But if you go along with it, and if you kind of let your inner purist go and say, okay, it's not Shakespeare, it's something completely different, then it can be a lot of fun. And because it's not Shakespeare, it means the ending is wide open. I mean, will the Romeo and Juliet in this version get a happier ending than the one in Shakespeare? I mean, why not? This is a completely new imagining. I don't want to spoil the ending here. You'll just have to watch till the end to find out yourself. Although here's a hint. This is a Japanese story. So expect a big emphasis on duty and sacrifice near the end. Now that's not a spoiler, that's just what you can expect from a Japanese story. Now, this anime series, I think, is what would get classified as shoujo, meaning anime series for girls. Which, you know, like, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here, but as far as my entertainment choices go, I've never really considered myself a big fan of entertainment media aimed at girls. I've always, growing up, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Voltron, I consumed entertainment media that was meant for boys, and I was never really interested in the stuff that was targeted towards girls back in the US. But having watched this is actually all right, and I'm thinking to myself that maybe the US media is not really doing things right, because I think, I don't know, I'm going to get myself in trouble if I try and speak for what girls like or what girls don't like. But I get the feeling that this kind of media could be quite popular with girls and also with boys if it was introduced in the US. I mean, something that comes up occasionally is the argument that the comic book industry in the US has just completely shot themselves in the foot by only catering to boys. Whereas in Japan, comic books are consumed by both boys and girls, because comic books are they write stories for girls as well. And I thought to myself, here is a perfectly good, fun little story that could be written up, and it could be considered maybe a story for girls, but like it wouldn't be completely boring. It's possible to do media for girls that actually can be engaging. Hopefully that didn't sound too patronizing the way I said it. I guess the point is, I largely enjoyed this. The setting it's in a city in the sky with flying horses, so it's a complete fairy tale, but it has vaguely, roughly a 19th century European feel, which adds to the fairy tale feeling. There's plenty of action to spice things up. Juliet even starts fighting injustice in the town, disguised in a mask as the Red Wind. Which is kind of like a superhero, but, this being like a fairy tale, it's kind of like the Scarlet Pimpernel. It gives the story somewhat of a 1700s swashbuckling type feel. There are a lot of subplots to keep things interesting. There are some narrow escapes to keep you on the edge of your seat. There's betrayals, intrigues between the two battling families. But the main story is, of course, the romance between Romeo and Juliet. And at times, it does get a bit sappy. Although more often, it doesn't get super sappy. More often, it is just like a teenage romance. In fact, maybe it's a little bit too much like a teenage romance. There are all these scenes where a character is like, oh my god, he actually likes me. What do? I'd better run away before I say something stupid. Which, fair enough, is probably what a teenager would do in this situation, but I don't know. Those kind of scenes I tired of quickly. However, the good news is that once Romeo and Juliet do actually get the courage to talk to each other and develop a relationship, the relationship does progress in a fairly linear way from there on. And I mention that because I've watched a number of American dramas, things like Grey's Anatomy or The OC or something like that, where there's this relationship where they get together and then they break up and then they get together and then they start dating other people and then they realize they still have feelings for each other and then they get together again. That just drives me crazy. And then that's primarily the American dramas that do that. This one, the Japanese one, doesn't toy around with you. They get together and then they're together. There's none of this off again, on again stuff that's so prevalent in American dramas. So, yeah, I largely enjoyed this. I was not in the target demographic, but I liked it anyways.